Last week we began a new teaching series called A Better Way. The subtitle is When What We're Doing Isn't Working. And today I want to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And you will probably find over the course of this message the occasional confession, if that's okay. Because this is an area of my life that is desperately in need of improvement. And my guess is that for many of you that are here today, you'd say, you know what, Josh, I am with you on this journey. Anybody ready for that one? When what we're doing isn't working. Last week we kind of established, or at least I proposed the idea that the way most of us are doing life is not the best way, right? We're all doing life, obviously. You're here, you're living, you're breathing, at least for now. But we're not necessarily all doing it the very best way. Now, some of you out there, you might feel like, hey, there's nothing more that I could possibly want for this life. I feel absolutely and perfectly fulfilled and satisfied. I mean, there's nothing that I would ask for any improvement in. And you know what? If that's you this morning, then you can just sit down, relax, and get on your iPhone or whatever other phone, mobile device you have, and just completely ignore me, okay? Because I'm going to talk to everybody else today. Like, you can sit there and wallow in your perfection. But I want to talk to the real people. How many real people do I have here that say, you know what, if I were perfectly honest, I know that some of the ways in which I am doing life, probably aren't the best way. Why? Because I feel the pain of doing life the way I'm doing it. And so really what this series is about is an invitation. This is not about me trying to help you discern, what are the rules that we are supposed to live and operate our lives by, but really it's an invitation that we are all given to a better way of doing life. It's the way that Jesus did life. Jesus said, and you can believe this or not, but Jesus said, I came here so that people might experience life and life abundantly. Now, maybe you would say, I feel like I am experiencing life abundantly, or maybe you'd say, I feel like I'm experiencing life as if I were just trying to survive the next handful of hours or the next few days or the next couple of weeks. Many of us are missing out on what Jesus, I think, envisioned as a life of abundance, a life that is full, a life that is complete. Many of us are missing out on that because we live a very rushed life, and that's exactly what I want to talk about today. It's avoiding the rush hour. How many of you spend a little time in rush hour from time to time? That's just part of your commute? Some of you out there, we're fortunate, right? Many of us who live in this community, we don't necessarily have rush hour. I've experienced that. I lived for years where I wasn't commuting to Boston, but I was commuting, to Portsmouth, and the way in which we had to go was oftentimes just jam-packed with highway drivers, right? And there's all kinds of highway improvements, bridge improvements, things like that would cause traffic to come to a complete halt. And so what you had to do is you had to strategize the time that you left your home. Because the reality is, if I left at a certain time, I'd get stuck in this immense amount of traffic that would lead to a commute that was really twice as long as it otherwise would have been. And for what? To get to work a handful of minutes earlier, but with a whole lot more pain as my day began, just with the frustration of dealing with the traffic. And so what we want to do in our lives is avoid, as much as we possibly can, the rush hour. And that pertains not just to traffic situations, but really the rushing around that we do in all of our lives. How many of you'd say, I feel rushed a lot of time? Like, I just have so much, this flurry of activity that's going on in my life that I feel rushed. And it really doesn't matter what stage of life you're in. You could be a student in high school, and you're doing, obviously, your work day at school, homework, extracurricular activities, social engagements, church, all these activities, and they have you kind of running around in a tizzy, right? You could be a regular working person, and obviously between the balance of work and home life and errands and all the things that kind of go along with that, and maybe having to deal with moving kids around from this activity to that activity, you feel like everything is just a big rush. Listen, you could be retired and your life could still be full of a flurry of activity that could have you feeling rushed and really missing out on the better way. And so what I'm going to talk about today is probably going to sound like it pertains to the workaholic, right? And so don't raise your hands, but how many of you are workaholics? Right? You know who you are. If you're a workaholic, you're going to feel like I'm mostly talking to you. And if you're not, you're going to feel like you get this Sunday off. But it's not true. My wife, Renee, she spent many years as a stay-at-home mom who didn't work outside of the house. I would describe her life as incredibly rushed for many of those years, with all the responsibilities and engagements that she had, dealing with 3 kids and a husband who barely helped, right? And so it just, again, it doesn't matter what stage of life you're in. This really, I think, pertains to all of us. So we're going to talk about avoiding the rush hour. If you have your Bibles, turn to Mark chapter 2. We're going to read verses 13 to 17. This is a little story, very simple story about just, again, the way that Jesus seemed to do his life. And I want to look at some of the things about the way that Jesus seemed to do life on a day-to-day basis, and what might be some of the things that we can extrapolate from that to apply to our own lives. Mark chapter 2, starting in verse 13. Then Jesus went out to the lake shore again and taught the crowds that were coming to him. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at his tax collector's booth. Now, those of you who have read the Bible a lot, you hear this name Levi. You probably know him more commonly as Matthew. Okay, so Levi and Matthew are the same guy, who ultimately becomes one of Jesus' 12 disciples, one of his 12 apostles. So as he walked along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at his tax collector's booth. Now, I don't know exactly what the importance of whose son he was, but Mark here thinks it's important enough to mention it. He's the son of Alphaeus. Perhaps that's because many of the readers from 2,000 years ago knew who Alphaeus was. Maybe he was well known enough that that would have meant something. It would have triggered a thought in the original readers' minds. Oh, Alphaeus, yeah. This could have meant that Levi, as a tax collector, a person that was estranged from normal society, that was not welcomed, that was considered to be kind of an outcast there on the margins, a person that was hated because of his profession and because of his torn allegiance between Israel and captivating Rome. Perhaps his father here is mentioned because it's known that Levi chose a course for his life that left him abandoned by his family. Maybe Alphaeus was, a good, God-fearing, Israel-loving Jewish man, and was very disappointed and hurt and dejected at the choices his son made. And so this is just an allusion to the fact that, again, that Matthew was this outcast even from his own family. Or perhaps Alphaeus was exactly what Matthew was, and perhaps this was a multi-generation kind of family business. And it's like, oh, you know Alphaeus, right? Yeah, I mean, he's that guy, right? That, again, everybody in society kind of hated. So we don't know exactly why, but it appears to be important enough for us, for Mark to mention it. Well, anyway, Jesus comes across Levi here, and he says to him, "Follow me and be my disciple." And so Levi got up and he followed him. That's a very strange scene for us to really wrap our minds around. Just imagine if you're at work tomorrow and you're going about your business, and suddenly this man for whom you're somewhat acquainted, I don't imagine Levi had absolutely no idea who Jesus was. Word was getting around. The crowds were probably giving away the importance of who Jesus was. But just imagine you're at work, right? And all of a sudden, this Jesus shows up and says, "I want you to stop what you're doing. I want you to leave your profession, and I want you to come and follow me." How many of you would be ready to do that? Probably None of us. But that's exactly what happened, right? Levi got up and he followed him. Later, Levi invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. So again, here just pointing to how Levi was viewed and understood within society. You think about the people in society that you would consider to be disreputable, to be outcasts, to be out there on the margins, people that you wouldn't really want to normally associate with, people maybe that you would describe as beneath you if you wanted to use that kind of language, right? That's sort of the feeling. The prejudice that was felt toward Levi as a tax collector was incredibly strong. Along with a lot of Levi's friends and acquaintances, those are the people that he rubbed shoulders with. And so he throws this dinner party, invites Jesus, all of his disciples to come, and who else is there but the people that Levi knows and is friends with? Other tax collectors, other people that are, going to the same club that he's going to, that are hanging out in the same places where he's hanging out. In fact, it says here, just as a side of commentary, that there were many people of this kind among Jesus' followers. It turns out that the band of people that seemed to kind of follow Jesus around were part of this crowd. And now here Jesus is in somebody's home eating, having a meal with them. Well, when the teachers of religious law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with tax collectors and other sinners, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with such scum?" Why is he eating with these people? Why is he spending time associating with these people that are certainly not worthy of his association? I mean, he is supposed to be, after all, a reputable teacher of the law, a reputable rabbi, somebody that other people are following, a person who is proclaiming some pretty significant things about his own identity. How is he hanging out with these people? Well, when Jesus heard this, he told them, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. And I have not come to call those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. Now, what can we learn from this story as it is expressed through Jesus' life? Well, I want to spend a few moments talking about what looks like the pace at which Jesus moves. Some of you here today, you move at a fast pace. You're like I am. I rarely walk anywhere. I generally get out of my car, a little less now that I'm getting older, but if I went to a store, I would generally get out of my car and probably fast walk or jog to the entrance of the store and get my stuff done. And those of you who are fast-paced, you also know how frustrating it is to be behind somebody who's just not moving at the pace I could do this for a lot longer, except that I'll run out of time. I'm probably going to run out of time anyway, right? But you get the point, right? People move at different paces. Jesus seemed to have this pace. And the pace of Jesus' life accommodated crowds of people. Crowds of people came to Jesus and he taught them, is how this part of the story starts out. Jesus spent time dealing with the crowds. Now, the crowds here, they represent the busyness of Jesus, his work, as it were. I don't know about you, I don't have crowds of people coming to see me or talk to me. Well, I mean, today. That's probably not even primarily why you're here, though. Jesus, this was an everyday occurrence for him. Crowds of people, waves of people vying for his attention. This represents the busyness of his life. And so you might not have crowds of people that are coming after you to talk to you, to hang out with you, to find out things that you know that they don't know. But you do have stuff. right? We have work, we have responsibilities, obligations, things that we've signed up for, things that we know we have to do, things that we've put on the back burner that are nagging at us, right? We're busy, and so we have these crowds, and the pace that Jesus lived his life seemed aptly suited to deal with or to accommodate the crowds that came for him. Now, let me tell you a couple things about crowds. First of all, crowds are relentless, right? Crowds are absolutely relentless. Probably there's just one after another. I mean, this is Jesus after all. And people wanted to be near him. People wanted to talk to him. People wanted to listen to him. And so the crowds, they just continued to come one after another. Each of them probably presented their own particular challenges. Sometimes there may have been a crowd where, some guy was there who asked a question that somebody from the previous crowd asked, and now Jesus finds himself having to repeat himself. I already talked about that like 14 minutes ago. Where were you? Why weren't you listening? Why weren't you paying attention? Maybe there were some repeat customers. Maybe as Jesus was walking along, some knucklehead who was there yesterday asking the same ridiculous, nagging questions or proposing the same ridiculous, nagging ideas was there bothering, quote unquote, Jesus again. So Jesus is like, all right, well, let's go through this again. How many of you, as we're talking about crowds, you can identify things in your life that sound a lot like that? Like the crowds that just seem to be relentless, to kind of come one thing after another. Or, just as soon as you feel like you've cleaned up this mess, all of a sudden there's another mess that presents itself and you don't ever feel like you can get on with it or on with the next thing. Imagine, again, as the crowds are coming, Jesus, he had to have grown tired. Jesus experienced humanity in exactly the same way you and I experience humanity. I don't know about you, but I feel very different at the end of the day than I do at the beginning of the day. The same went for Jesus. He had to have experienced the occasional hangriness, right? As, again, the crowds just proved relentless. And we have that. We have crowds in our own lives. It could be waves of people. It could be waves of just things. But they come at us one after another. Picture at the ocean, the rocks that are there that are just getting the beat down from wave after wave after wave after wave. And there's nothing they can do about it except just take it, again and again and again, waiting for the tide to change. When they'll get a little break, they'll get a little reprieve. How many of you'd say, my life feels like that sometimes? Like on those rocks, on the shore, just getting, the beat down of the waves again and again, just waiting for the day to end, only knowing that in a handful of hours, I'm going to have to go through that again. So the crowds are relentless. Crowds are also demanding. The crowds are demanding. You know what the crowds didn't do is the crowds didn't come and they didn't show up expecting to listen to Thomas. Right? That's not what they were there for. The work that Jesus was doing, the things that kind of kept Jesus busy and occupied his time, they were not things that he could easily delegate to somebody else. He couldn't be like, hey, you know what, I'm tired. Thomas, why don't you take this one? Right? Thomas would have gone out there and everybody would have been jeering and booing. He's like, where's Jesus? We want Jesus. How many of you feel like in your own life that the demands are things that they're specifically targeted at you? Like they're the things that you have to take care of. And you can't farm it out as much as you'd like to. You can't afford to get somebody else to do it. It's a demand that kind of sits there on you and it piles up with all the other demands. That's the crowds and how they kind of live and operate in our lives. And yet Jesus' pace seemed to accommodate very, very well the crowds. And you'll find, we're not going to really get into this, but you'll find from time to time Jesus would break off from the crowds and he would go alone and he would pray and be by himself, away from the noise, away from everything that was going on. We'll kind of get to that in another message in weeks to come. But Jesus experienced the crowds just like we do. But Jesus' pace seemed to accommodate that very well. But not only did Jesus' pace seem to accommodate the crowds, again, these demanding, these relentless crowds of people that were coming, but the pace of Jesus' life also seemed to accommodate even individuals. And this is important because, some of us may find ourselves able to deal with all the stuff, all the work, right? That one thing after another. I'm saying I am able to efficiently work through task after task after task after task, and I can get stuff done, right? And maybe you work well in the pressure and the stress of all that has to be done, but what often gets lost, even when you're doing that really well, what gets lost are the individuals along the way. That single person that it just now goes unnoticed, right? Because of all the other stuff that you have to do. I don't know about you, but a lot of times I am just so overwhelmed by the barrage of things that are vying for my attention. The last thing I see is the human face of another person. The last thing I experience is the trouble that they're feeling. The last thing I know is the burden that they're carrying. Why? Because I'm just overcome with my own stuff. But Jesus' pace seemed aptly able to accommodate the importance of the individual. As he walked along, it says, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple, he said. As he walked along, isn't it interesting that everything Jesus did, he had to walk to? I don't know about you, but most of my getting from place to place is done at 70 miles per hour, right? Most of what I do is driving at a high speed to get from one place to another. And you're like that. We rush from one thing to the next, from one activity to the next activity. We scream at the internet, when our download speeds hit 25 megabits per second, because that's just not fast enough, right? Like, this is taking too long to load up on my iPhone, right? We want things in a hurry. We want to get it done and move on. And again, what sometimes gets lost are the single individual people who are just lost in the crowd. But Jesus says here, as he walked along, he saw Levi. He saw him. I don't know about you, but I really love for me to figure out how to better orient my life so that I can see what I need to see. Yeah, I'm going to have to deal with the waves, right? There's nothing I can do to make the waves stop. There's nothing I can do to keep the relentless crowds at bay, all this stuff vying for my attention. But how do I position myself so that I can deal with that and at the very same time deal with the importance of people? Well, Jesus' pace set a pattern for ours. The pace at which Jesus lived his life, whether you could look at the way he just kind of walked from place to place as he stopped and took time for individuals, when he was always seemed to have the margin necessary in his life to stop what it was that he was doing or where he was going for somebody else. That sets a pattern for ours. Jesus said to Levi, "Follow me and be my disciple." And so Levi got up and followed him. He followed him, and that's exactly what we're talking about. When we're talking about a better way, it's not about like a whole bunch of rules that we have to discover and then start to follow. It's a way of living our lives that's patterned after the way Jesus lived his life. Did you know that in order for Levi to follow Jesus, he had to follow Jesus? That means that he had to pattern his cadence after Jesus's. And if Jesus wasn't running, then Levi, if he were following Jesus, he couldn't be running. If Jesus wasn't rushed to get from one thing to the next, then neither could Levi. Let's go, get all tensed up and agitated about how long they were spending here, because he just wouldn't have been following at that point. Jesus walked, so Levi had to walk. The priorities that Jesus had established and lived by, Levi had to adopt those priorities for his own life if he was truly going to be a follower of Jesus. And so what we're invited to, every one of us here, we are invited to live our lives after the pattern by which Jesus lived his, to follow his cadence, to walk in his footsteps, to be less rushed about all the things that are going on, and to live our lives as Jesus did. The text goes on to say later, Levi, again, we're talking about Levi following Jesus. Later, Levi invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. Levi, he's following Jesus, and he gets pretty excited. He's like, let's eat, right? That's a big deal back then. Throw a party. Let's get together. Let's celebrate the day. We'll have a party over at my house. And so Levi invites Jesus and his disciples, and again, all the people that he knew. I mean, if you got Jesus coming to your house, you know what you want to do? You want to fill your house. Right? If you had a really, really important person coming to your house, wouldn't you want, like, for all your friends and family to have the opportunity to be there and to experience that as well? I mean, you wouldn't want for that opportunity to go wasted, right? So Levi has Jesus at his house, the person that everybody wants to see, and he fills his house with his people. And Jesus came, and he sat, and he ate, and he hung out with them. And I think he did that because that was what mattered the most. What mattered the most was a bunch of people that could not advance his agenda. You think, well, what should Jesus have been doing? I mean, by our calculations, Jesus should have been rubbing shoulders with the elitists of society, right? He should have been, making his way, finding inroads to the real movers and shakers. Are any of you under the threat of having the President of the United States show up at your house for dinner? Like, probably not. I mean, we're not important enough for that. There's nobody important, quote unquote, scheduled to come and hang out with me at my house. I don't know about you. Those people tend to hang out with each other, right? But Jesus didn't do that. He didn't follow the patterns of our society where important people hung out with important people, where VIPs spent time with other VIPs. Jesus, he hung out with Levi and with Levi's friends because that's what mattered most. These people that were there at Levi's house, they had no way of advancing Jesus' agenda. The things that Jesus wanted to do, the things he wanted to accomplish, the things that he was about, they were in no position to help him. They couldn't help advance his cause. They couldn't give him the resources that he might have needed. They were outcasts. They were not influencers. But Jesus, he hung out with them because that's what mattered the most. The pace of Jesus' life prioritized the things that matter the most. And we have to start to understand better, like, how do I pattern my life after the things that matter most? I want to share something very personal with you. So as I was preparing for this series, I had the thought that I should kind of figure out what my days look like, what my weeks look like. Like, how do I spend my time? We're going to talk about feeling less rushed. We probably should have a good idea of, well, how are we spending our times, and what is it that's making us feel rushed if we in fact feel that way? So I downloaded an app called the A Tracker, and I'd encourage you all to get it. The free version, I'll tell you, is very lame. okay? You really can't do anything with it, and so it's going to cost you $4 or $5 if you actually want to use the thing the way it's designed. But once you have it, it's great. And you basically you just track your time. Every time you kind of switch activities or modes or whatever, you just hit a button and say, all right, now I'm doing this, now I'm doing this, and it adds up the 24 hours of your day, and then you can find out, how did I actually spend my time? And so this is what a recent 7-day period looked like in my life, all right? So I spent 45 hours working. You'll see it up there. 45 hours working, 5 hours commuting, 10 hours doing errands and chores, things like that, which I would kind of qualify as work, right? Things that we have to do. 7 hours of quiet time, just about an hour a day, me hanging out with God, praying, reading my Bible, things like that, things I know you're all doing. 15 hours of quality family time. I know it's probably not as good as it ought to be, but a couple hours a day that I've carved out. 7 hours of leisure, 16 hours of rest and worship, right? So for those of you that don't know, one of the commandments is to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And interestingly, as I'm kind of looking at this, when you take out the 8 hours that we're supposed to be sleeping anyway, there's 16 hours left in the day, and that's in the 168 hours that we have available to us in a week. We're supposed to spend 16 of those hours just in worship and rest, ceasing from our labor, which interestingly and ironically is about 10%, right? 10% means something to some of you. All right, so 16 hours rest and worship, 5 hours, serving my fellow man, doing stuff, 56 hours of sleeping. And that left me with a whopping 2 hours to just kind of quietly appreciate some art, poetry, and quiet reflection. So this is a kind of a 7-day week for me. And you know what that represents? Some of you know. That represents a whole lot of hogwash right there, okay? So that right there looks absolutely nothing like a real week in the life of Josh. That's me kind of just putting some numbers in that would say, this looks like a pretty good, fairly well-balanced way for me to spend my 168 hours, okay? So listen, I got to be honest with you. That wasn't right. The person who cuts my hair is here today. Hi, Ashley. And I just got my hair cut the other day, and so I can't lie because she's here. She knows that what I just put up there a moment ago is not accurate because I had an appointment to get my hair cut. I changed that appointment. Then I tried to change it back, and then I changed it again, and then I changed it again, all in the span of about 15 minutes. And so if I were to tell you that I am just happily living an unrushed life, she'd be standing at the door, with a sign saying, he's a big fat liar. All right, so this is an actual representation of what things look like. Now, let me say a couple things about this, because the first part of that's glaring, I know. So let me say a couple things. First of all, this particular snapshot is a little weird. It's just, there's a confluence of things that required an incredible amount of work. And so I wouldn't say that it's always like that. Because I know it probably feels like, oh, look at Mr. Humblebrag up there, right? Just showing us how much he's working, right? How much he's earning his paycheck and all that. I say that jokingly. I will be perfectly honest with you. That's evil. That's terrible. That is not something to be proud of. That is not something to, say, hey, look at me. That's awful, right? That's your pastor, not living life as it was meant to be lived, okay? So let me just say that on the one hand. The other thing that's kind of funny about this is I knew that I was going to be sharing this with you. And so I had every reason and every incentive to make this look as good as I possibly could, and this is what I came up with. All right, so this just tells you how truly dysfunctional I actually am. I appreciate you guys constantly taking that off because you don't want people staring at these terrible numbers, but we've got to do it, all right? So 78 hours working, 9 hours getting ready for work, 10 hours driving to and from work, a couple hours for errands. Okay, so let me stop there for a second. Now, you might not work for you might not be punching the clock for 78 hours. I pray you aren't. But I will bet that some of you, maybe many of you, are doing the kinds of things that would qualify for that same category of work, and you're not getting paid for it. Like the activities that we sign up for, the activities that vie for our attention and demand from our schedule, okay, like they're categorically very, very similar, whether you get paid for them or not. And so I know I'm here with a bunch of other honest people who'd say, you know what, if I got the app and I did this, maybe some of my stuff would look the same way. So you got cooking, eating, some downtime, leisure, exercise, sleeping, okay, all that. Now, take it down, all right? Don't ever show that again. Now, I did that because I felt like I wanted to know, I felt like I wanted to share it, but also, maybe it provides a little bit of a baseline, because one of the things you can do with this app is now you can set a goal to say, okay, well, that's not working. That's not helping my family, right? That's not helping the people that I work with, just because maybe I'm working a lot. No, my life, it's too busy. Our text goes on to say, but when the teachers of religious law who were Pharisees saw him eating with tax collectors and other sinners, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with such scum? And when Jesus heard this, he told them, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. We are more like the Pharisees when it comes to how we spend our time. There were thousands of things that were more urgent for Jesus to be doing, for him to be spending his time on, than when he actually was. Many things that were very, very urgent. So again, I'm not talking to just the workaholics. Again, you could be retired. You could be a person that doesn't work outside the house. We fill our lives. We cram it full of activity. We're not going to put it back up there, but if I didn't work those, say, 78 hours, if I didn't have all that time working, let's say it was actually 45 hours. Those other 23 hours, or 33 hours, whatever it is, you know what I would have done? I would have crammed them with other activities. That's my problem. And they could have been fun activities. They could have been work-related activities, but they would have been activities that would have kept me from experiencing what matters the most. And so our work can certainly lead to a rushed, hurried life, but our work is more than just our work. When you think about our work, I want you to think about the errands that we have to run, the running around that we have to do, our hobbies, our leisure, exercising, the TV watching, the social media trolling, our household chores, our getting ready for company to come, getting rid of said company, that's come. Like all that stuff, right? It's busy, it's work, and it creates rush in our lives. And so my question for you today is, are you too busy for what matters most? Are you just too busy? Is your life too full? Does your schedule have too or such demands that you're too busy for what matters the most? Jesus knew exactly what he needed to be doing, and he did it. He understood his purpose for being, and nothing was going to rush him out of it. He knew exactly why he was here. I've not come to call sinners, people that I've not come to call people that think they are righteous, but to call sinners who know they are in need of forgiveness. Like that, he knew exactly what he was here for. And you and I, we have been created and designed very, very particularly for one very important thing, and that is for us to experience God. Beyond anything else, God wants for us to experience him, to know him, to be in relationship with him, and then for all the other things to take a second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on, back seat to that priority. We were built for that. And it's not that we have to do it, but if we don't, well, we're gonna experience life that comes along with not doing it. So nothing would rush Jesus from his life's purpose. He understood what it was. And I pray that you and we would just grow in our understanding of what God has built us for. Relationship with him, relationship with others, the ability to not rush from one thing to the next, but to actually experience the abundant life that Jesus has for us. A couple things I want to encourage you to do as we close out this morning. There's a book that is a really great discipleship book. Some of you I know have probably read it. It's a couple years old. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. If you've never read this book, I want to encourage you to buy it and to read it. It's very, very easy reading, and it's very, 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 very challenging. And this will help you just open up your mind to see how rushed we actually are, how busy we actually are, so that you can then start to figure out strategies to fix it. Another thing I want to encourage you to do is to discover your time budget. If we were doing a message on finances, one of the first things we talk about is you've got to make a budget. If you're having money problems, you've got to make a budget. You got to know how much money's coming in. You have to know where it's going out. Like if you're ever going to fix anything, you have to know. And so you've got to do a little like what I did here. How is my time actually being spent? Maybe you watch way more TV than you ever would have guessed you did. Just like, when people do a financial budget, they're like, I did not know I spent that much money eating out, right? Like those are the kinds of things that come up. And so discover your time budget. How is your time actually being allocated? How do you then want your time to actually be allocated? And what's it going to take to get you from point A to point B? And then finally, the last thing I want to encourage you, and this is just kind of a side note, but very, very important, something we'll come back to, I'm sure, again and again, it's start to think about the Sabbath. Start to think about the Sabbath. Start to think about what it means to actually set aside a day to rest and to worship. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of that right now. The band's going to lead us as we sing this song, where we're just going to quiet ourselves for a few moments. And so I want to encourage you as we do that, worship along and just experience a little bit of the rest that I believe God wants for all of us to experience. We have a little work to do. The ushers are going to receive the offering at the beginning part of this song. So as the buckets come, just pass them down from your right to your left. And thank you for doing that. You can drop your communication card in there, your offering, all that. But let's sing this song together, and then we'll head out.